Well, good morning. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Amina weekly report. So, this morning, we'll be taking you to the Middle East. Quite recently, you have heard of proposed ceasefire between the Hamas and the IDF of Israel. Proposed ceasefire. It was organized by the President of the United States, Donald Trump. So, we are very concerned about this commitment, whether or not this proposed ceasefire from the President of the United States, whether or not it's going to hold, because this is our concern after 2 years of destruction by the state of Israel, Netanyahu, and their allies. The number one is the United States contributed so deeply to this many destruction that took place in Gaza. So now we understand that they have made an agreement to cease fire. And the $1 million question here is this ceasefire a real ceasefire? Are they going to listen? Israel. Is Israel going to allow this ceasefire to hold? And many will say no. And I am part of that group as well. I'm not sure if this ceasefire this proposed ceasefire to something that's going to last. Because with the threat and the actions of Israel after this proposed ceasefire, is quite alarming that this is not a real ceasefire. And this is where we are. So, on our Al Jazeera story, it is reported, the inside story we do relay on our program, and we're going to go there to make sure that we bring this report to you from our Al Jazeera story, because you're aware that journalists were not allowed to do any journalism from this site that this war was going on, because Israel was murdering journalists. They murdered a lot of journalists. Over 200 journalists was killed in Israel. In Gaza. And in Israel, Israel did not allow international journalists to do any filming from inside Israel. Even during that 12 days war, we saw that they were stopping journalists from giving reports on this scene, except the journalists that they themselves have control over to report what they want to report. Al Jazeera is not allowed in Israel because there is something they don't want for the world to know. So we will go to our Al Jazeera Insta story to bring you the latest on this proposed ceasefire agreement that was signed, and not even signed, just something that is not guaranteed that it's going to last. So in studio, we will bring you our Al Jazeera Inside story. So welcome to Al Jazeera.
We start with where performative politics meets reality on the ground, and the disconnect between what Donald Trump is saying about his ceasefire deal in Gaza and what it has really meant for Palestinians there so far. Trump failed to win the Nobel Peace Prize, but the Venezuelan politician who did win it is doing her best to make it up to him.
His actions have been decisive.
And move over, boys. Make some room for some right-wing women, American influencers, the pro-MAGA womanosphere. The ceasefire in Gaza has been hailed as an historic breakthrough, albeit primarily by its chief architect, Donald Trump, and to a lesser, unconvincing extent by America's allies in Israel. For Palestinians, however, it's a different story. Israeli killings have continued. Tons of humanitarian aid is still blocked at the border. People are still going hungry. Captives have been released, 20 Israelis held in Gaza, with 2,000 Palestinians freed from Israeli jails. And the reporting on that provided yet another case study in double standards that helps explain why Israel was allowed to inflict its genocide on Gaza for so long. The Israeli captives have names, they have faces, stories, whereas the Palestinians released go unnamed. Their stories go untold. And Israel is still blocking international journalists from entering the genocide zone, which does not bode well for Palestinians. Contrast what's happening in Gaza with the way the ceasefire was announced in Egypt, and it's like comparing a horror show to a piece of political theater, directed by many of the same actors, politicians, who, lest we forget, enabled and empowered the Israelis to commit a genocide in the first place. A ceasefire hanging by a thread over a land covered in an estimated 55 million tons of rubble. More than 1 million Palestinians living in tents, still going hungry, with not enough aid trucks getting in. Israel's latest pretense for blocking them and threatening to blow up this ceasefire, the bodies of all the dead Israeli captives have not yet been returned. Hamas says it cannot find those 19 bodies in all that rubble to dig them out. In Gaza, where at least 67,000 Palestinians have been killed and tens of thousands more are still missing and presumed dead, but unable to be located either under that same sea of wreckage.
This was going to take quite some time because the entire territory has been reduced to a pile of rubble. Hamas doesn't have the heavy equipment and sufficient information to even locate where these corpses are.
It's almost as though Netanyahu is deliberately trying to find a pretext to return back to open warfare. 3 days just simply isn't enough when Palestinians haven't even been able to recover their own dead.
They don't care about the hostages. It's about occupying Gaza, continuing the genocide. They want to use this so-called violation to go back to fighting. Will Trump allow it? It's another question.
From the moment it was announced through to its signing in Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt, this ceasefire has had a precarious feel to it. Largely because, fanfare aside, the devil is in the details, and this deal has precious few to offer, regardless of how Donald Trump described it.
We're going to be signing a document that's going to spell out a lot of rules and regulations, and it's very comprehensive.
More than 20 countries sent their leaders to attend, including the UK, France, and Canada. Politicians posing as peacemakers, while their governments still ship weapons to Israel. And neither the Israeli Prime Minister nor Hamas's leaders were even in the room. Added up, and what was presented in Egypt was not even a ceasefire agreement. It was a declaration of what should happen rather than an agreement on what will happen.
Okay, thank you.
A wish list, effectively, made in
So, you heard that. The agreement that was made in quite recent agreement they made, it was not a concrete agreement for the ceasefire. It's just something that is fragile. There could be a problem anytime. So this is a complete threat to the people of Gaza. So there is no ceasefire. There is no ceasefire. It's just something that they have proposed to do. It's just something that they should expect trouble at any time.
in Washington.
If you look at the communique that was issued at the Sharm el-Sheikh summit, it's just one platitude after another. It says absolutely nothing about the substance or content of any peace. It just basically lauds Donald Trump as a great peacemaker and issues a bunch of platitudes about how important peace is, but what that peace is supposed to look like, when it will be achieved, how it might be achieved. There is not a word in the declaration about that.
We shouldn't believe that Trump has suddenly been converted to some kind of benevolent overseer of the Israeli-Palestinian context. This is a guy who 2 minutes ago was aiding and abetting a genocide. The summit in Egypt was clearly the victory celebration that Trump wanted. But Trump has the attention span of a flea. And what's going to be required here is sustained pressure on Netanyahu not to simply resume the genocide now that the hostages are freed. It's unclear whether Trump can do that, but he's not going to get a Nobel Peace Prize for a temporary halt to the genocide that then picks up again.
Sharm el-Sheikh can probably be best described as a ceremonial moment. It was political posturing with those states involved in the summit. They are actually deeply complicit in what we have seen unfold in the last 2 years. And I think, if anything, this really sort of assists them. It's a successful PR stunt in terms of assisting themselves as well as Israel in avoiding any kind of accountability, especially once the dust settles, and where many of these states and institutions have a lot to account for.
Palestinians would put more stock into this ceasefire and its chances of lasting if so many Israelis were not itching for the fighting to continue. They're unconvinced by what Benjamin Netanyahu is saying publicly.
And together, Mr. President, we will achieve this peace.
Saluting Donald Trump, when everyone knows Trump forced the prime minister to sign up to the deal. Netanyahu's defense minister, Israel Katz, tweeted that the Israeli military still must destroy Hamas's tunnels in Gaza, and that he has ordered it to do so. The far-right finance minister, Bezalel Smotrich, warned against, quote, short-sighted celebrations and the Knesset voting in favor of the ceasefire. The lethal airstrikes continue, including one that killed at least 5 civilians in Shujaiya, in Gaza City. And perhaps most concerning of all, the Israelis are still locking the international media out of Gaza, which suggests even more war crimes are coming that they do not want the world to witness.
The fact Israel is preventing international media into Gaza shows us they understand the potential damage of journalists going in there. International media could do research, could talk to people, and this is why Israel is fighting a petition of the Foreign Press Association here in Israel to allow journalists in. They know when Gaza opens to journalists, this will change completely, and the protest and the objection to what Israel did will only grow, the opposite from what the Israeli government and the public are maybe hoping.
Anyone examining Western media coverage in search of double standards need look no further than the reporting on the latest release of captives. The freeing of 20 Israelis, including soldiers captured in Gaza, has attracted much more coverage, much more empathy than the 2,000 Palestinians freed from Israeli jails. Profiles and photo galleries of the Israeli captives, most of whom emerged in far better condition after being held in Gaza, where there is a severe shortage of food and medicine, than the Palestinians released from Israeli jails, where there are no shortages at all. And these were not isolated cases of journalistic bias. It was an across-the-board systemic pattern on the BBC and CNN, in the New York Times, the Washington Post, and Deutsche Welle, and news agencies like the Associated Press.
For international media, it's much more easy to relate to the Israeli hostages because there was an international campaign.
I mean, they're holding on to their sons exactly the way that you would hold on to your son.
They're seen as Western citizens who were kidnapped to Gaza, and there was an international campaign and support all across the world. Palestinians that are held without a trial is unfortunately something not new that is happening for dozens and dozens of years, and Israel kind of normalized it, the occupation system, both in the West Bank and in Gaza, so it doesn't seem as something new as news for most people.
When it comes to Israeli hostages, Western media have often presented those hostages being released in this round as civilians.
But these 20 people did nothing. The people
that completely obfuscates the reality here, which is many of those that have been released are soldiers, and the fact that not only has the Israeli administration tried to present those hostages as civilians, but worse yet, that Western media has parroted that, has been so incredibly detrimental to the decontextualization and obfuscation of facts here, which are that those are legitimate combatants in the context of war.
The corpse of a dead Israeli captive meant more to Washington than the lives of many thousands of Palestinian children. I have no doubt that we're going to see a detailed profile of every single Israeli captive in Western media. The Palestinian is at best a statistic. A young autistic Palestinian child seized from the Gaza Strip and kept in the most inhumane conditions. He is, for all intents and purposes, a terrorist, because it's common for the Western media to ascribe humanity to colonial powers and ascribe only the most sinister motives to their darker victims.
All while the Israelis maintain the most inhumane of pressure tactics,
ואנחנו מחויבים להשיב את כולם עד האחרון שבהם.
Capitalizing on Hamas's failure, its inability to dig out the last of those Israeli bodies, to keep blocking aid, to kill even more Palestinians.
The Israeli government shows itself willing to starve Palestinian civilians as a way of getting at Hamas. Hamas says that it's trying to find the bodies and that they're hidden in the rubble. Even the US government seems to believe Hamas. But Israel, rather than trying to pressure Hamas directly, is again trying to pressure Palestinian civilians. That is the essence of a war crime.
This year's Nobel Peace Prize went to a Venezuelan opposition leader and not to Donald Trump, who kept telling us he was the most deserving candidate. And the winner, Maria Corina Machado, has dedicated her victory to the Venezuelan people and to Trump. Meenakshi Ravi has more on what her endgame might be.
After learning that she had won the Nobel Peace Prize, Maria Corina Machado went on Fox News to explain why she was dedicating it to Donald Trump.
Not only has he been involved in only a few months in solving 8 wars, but his actions have been decisive to have Venezuela now at a threshold of freedom.
Machado was pandering to Trump, echoing his misleading claim of having ended 8 wars and attempting to press Trump to lean harder on Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro, who has been in power for 12 years. Machado is the latest of a number of popular Venezuelan opposition politicians to have the tacit backing of the United States. It's a pattern decades in the making. For more than 25 years, Venezuela's left-wing government has openly opposed US influence. In return, Washington, citing some valid and some exaggerated human rights and political abuses, has imposed economic sanctions on the country. It's also offered its support to opposition candidates. Trump's officials now routinely refer to Venezuela as a narco-state and have openly advocated for regime change there. They have an ally in Machado, and while she might be welcomed on US channels, Venezuelan media outlets, which face severe restrictions under Maduro, are of a different view. Telesur ran this headline on Machado: From coup plotter to Nobel Peace Prize winner.
For years, the right-wing blogosphere in the U.S. has been male-dominated. Hordes of podcasters and influencers swaying more men into Donald Trump's MAGA movement. But the 2024 election, where the president gained a bigger foothold with women, shone a light on a rising parallel force, the so-called womanosphere. Its mission to rebrand conservative politics as cool and engaging for a female audience. Through YouTube channels, social media, and podcasts, conservative women now offer hot takes on pop culture, snippets of everyday life, and relationship advice, all spiced with a heaping helping of right-wing politics. Like their male counterparts, they frame themselves as anti-woke warriors while offering women disillusioned with feminism a more traditional alternative. The Listening Post's Aletra Scrivo now on the women of MAGA and how they are strategically targeting and luring even more women into the fold.
Of all the absurd pronouncements Donald Trump has made, some of the most inflammatory have been about women.
I've said that if Ivanka weren't my daughter, perhaps I'd be dating. She turned on him like a dog, but she's crazy as a bedbug. That is one dumb woman. Sorry. I'm sorry, women. She's a dummy.
Despite the overt objectification and regressiveness in Trump's view of women, his MAGA movement commands substantial female support, including from several women who hold prominent positions within his administration. The first female White House chief of staff.
Susie Wiles, stand up, please. Susie Wiles.
The youngest ever press secretary.
Caroline Levitt. It's that face, it's that brain, it's those lips, the way they move like she's a machine gun.
A female attorney general.
Pam Bondi has done an unbelievable job.
And a female secretary of Homeland Security.
Christino, she's unbelievable. I was watching her riding yesterday on a horse. She was as good as anybody.
If you want your movement to be successful, to be popular, to be cool, you need charismatic, smart, funny, attractive women on board. It's often assumed because women aren't hugely visible in the far right that they aren't present at all. But that's actually never been the case. Women have a really important role in any far right movement which wants to soften its image, which wants to look more palatable, less extreme.
I don't think there was an intention of let's, soften the image of the administration. I think it was simply merit-based. American women feel empowered knowing that someone like Pam Bondi is the Attorney General, that someone like Tulsi Gabbard is Director of National Intelligence. These are critically important roles for this country, and these women are performing so incredibly well because they're smart, they're capable, they care, they're loyal. They put family and faith first, and they're America first.
We're seeing women being placed symbolically in their roles as wives and mothers to promote the Trump administration's agenda around supporting nuclear families and creating, quote, pro-life policies.
I love my job as press secretary, but nothing compares to being a mom.
But on this other hand, we're seeing an explosion of the right-wing ecosystem of female influencers.
Alternative right-wing media was once a male-dominated field. Increasingly, however, a cohort of women have carved out a space for themselves, the so-called womanosphere. Blending Trumpian politics, conspiracy rhetoric, pop culture takes, and a provocative presentation style, they've climbed the YouTube and Spotify charts. There are those, like Candace Owens, who lead on conspiracy theories.
I would stake my entire professional career on the fact that Brigitte Macron, the current First Lady of France, was born a man.
Others, like Megyn Kelly, dissect MAGA's core political issues.
Epstein had a very, very wide web of connections.
Then there are those who fill the Make America Healthy Again, or MAHA space, a movement critical of mainstream medical practices. At the forefront of that is Alex Clark, a self-defined cute-servative.
What if the Bible isn't just a spiritual guide, but a health manual we've been ignoring?
However, no one has quite caught Gen Z female audience's attention like Brett Cooper. After making a name for herself at the conservative media network, The Daily Wire, she struck it out on her own. In January, at just 23 years old, she launched a YouTube show, weaving her takes on the news with lifestyle content, political insights, and celebrity gossip.
Taylor Swift and Travis Kelce just broke the internet with their engagement announcement.
Cooper's show was a runaway hit. The first episode received 3.4 million views, and it now has more than 1.5 million subscribers.
Brett Cooper. She is a figure who is very adept at connecting with her audiences by coming across as authentic, accessible, and responsive to her followers. She likes to talk about issues ranging from the use of hormonal birth control, trans issues, and what she attacks as unfiltered wokeness at universities.
Lesbian dance theorist, or whatever the insane degree is that we want to laugh at today.
But then she will also talk about the latest scandals happening within the Trump administration and gossip that's happening in Hollywood, entertainment, and media industries.
We must talk about part 2 and now part 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7 of the Blake Lively, Justin Baldoni scandal.
Brett Cooper really was able to capture Gen Z and meet Gen Z where they're at. She focuses more on cultural commentary, and then she combines that with everyday relatability. She's obviously conservative, but she's very strong. She's very independent. She's very educated. She's a powerhouse. So while she has conservative principles and she affirms marriage and faith and motherhood, she also is someone who believes in empowerment for women.
And that is precisely where the paradox lies. Many of these women, both online and those within the Trump cabinet, have boosted their careers by telling other women to prioritize motherhood over their careers.
You can always have a career. It is not going anywhere. But children, family, your husband, marriages, that is not a renewable resource.
Even if not explicitly discouraging them from joining the workforce, the message from right-wing women has leaned heavily on emphasizing the importance of traditional gender roles. This feeds into a wider disillusionment with, quote, girl boss feminism, the promise that women could balance career success, personal fulfillment, and family often resulted in burnout, at home, at work, and even in dating. So the target for many of these womanosphere influencers is clear: feminism, its historical achievements, and those on the left who represent them.
I blame feminists for almost every ill that we have right now.
There are many women who are, feel completely disillusioned and betrayed by the Democrat Party, by liberalism, by radical feminism. And this mentality, this kind of eroding of traditional masculinity and trying to feminize men to a point where men are going through this kind of backlash process because they feel like they have been oppressed and suppressed by feminists who have tried to brainwash American women into thinking that they don't need men.
Girl boss and treat them like crap. And these types of attitudes have led to an entire generation of women who spent their 20s focused on their careers and rejecting men.
What they essentially mean is that, sure, this stuff might make you more free, going to the office every day, earning money, not needing to rely on your man for a house, for safety, that might make you more free. Being able to choose when you have a baby, or if you have a baby, that might make you more free. But it's not making you more happy. It's explicitly responsible for your lack of happiness.
In the 70s, women were given all sorts of lies. Things that we were told were going to improve our lives, make them better. But are we happier?
They turn the argument back on its head, essentially. They say, was this really the right sacrifice to make?
While it's true that many women are burnt out, 55% compared to 42% of men, according to an American Medical Association survey, and they're having fewer children, the problem isn't feminism per se. Rather, it's things like the disproportionate burden of unpaid labor women face, or the structural gender inequalities in the workplace. And the antidote to these issues is not selling nostalgia as empowerment.
Instead of focusing on the solution that governments and societies should support young people in trying to find employment, buying a house, and starting their lives, we're seeing the right instead offer this alternative vision of focusing on building families and sort of retreating into traditional gender roles where women are the homemakers instead of participating in public and civic life.
I think this demonstrates how, for progressives, there needs to be a more concrete and confident argument in favor of women's rights. It's not enough simply to say, well, look how terrible things were back then. That's just increasingly not effective as an argument. This is important for people to remember, that simply because we're saying we don't want to go back to the past, it doesn't mean we're saying everything right now as it stands is perfect.
And finally, a Washington Post investigation has revealed how the Israeli government used YouTube ads to rewrite the narrative of Gaza's famine, and how YouTube's owners at Google were more than okay with that.
This is real footage of Gaza food markets, July to August 2025.
The Post looked into videos like this one, put on YouTube by the Israelis of a market in Gaza where the food looked plentiful. It found that the video was shot just after the Israelis had allowed supplies into the Strip after months of restrictions, and the products were sold at prices most Palestinians simply could not afford. An internal Google email obtained by the Post shows that the company decided the ads did not violate its policies and went further. Staff were told that any future Israeli videos making similar claims about food or famine in Gaza would not violate Google's rules over safety and trust. The message was clear. Google's rules, which can be quite restrictive, did not apply to Israeli misinformation. They say the truth is the first casualty of war, and the people behind YouTube and Google have been accomplices, willing ones, in Gaza.
Demilitarization and no role for Hamas and other factions in the future governance of Gaza. That's part of US President Donald Trump's 20-point plan, which led to the ceasefire deal. So what's next for the Palestinian resistance movements? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Imran Khan. US President Donald Trump's 20-point plan for Gaza means there's no future role for Hamas and other armed factions in governing the Strip. Palestinian resistance movements have fought the occupation since their lands were first taken by Israeli and Zionist settlers. But decades since what the Palestinians call the Nakba, or the catastrophe, illegal occupation and violent Israeli oppression have intensified in both the occupied West Bank and in Gaza with the war and the genocide. In history, armed groups, including Israeli Zionists, have transitioned into politics, like the ANC in South Africa, the Kosovo Liberation Army, and the IRA in Ireland. So what's next for the Palestine resistance movements? And what lessons can be learned from other conflicts? And what happens if there's no meaningful political pathway for Palestinians and the new generation who have endured Israel's occupation and genocide? We'll discuss all of this with our guests shortly. But first, this report from Ferdy Akar.
An uneasy peace in Gaza as the US brokered ceasefire takes hold. The deal to end fighting also demands Hamas completely disarm under a yet-to-be-agreed framework and effectively disband forever. During such an apparent power vacuum, the Gaza Strip is meant to be governed by technocrats and only handed over to the Palestinian Authority that governs the occupied West Bank if and when it goes through mandated reforms. The deal leaves the future of Palestinian representation and resistance as uncertain as it's ever been. Since the collapse of the Oslo peace process in late 2000, Israel has always sought to portray any armed resistance by Palestinians as illegitimate. Yet, the right to resist foreign occupation and pursue self-determination is enshrined in international law. And around the world, many armed groups have evolved to become mainstream political organizations. 3 decades of conflict ended in Northern Ireland with a 1998 peace deal that saw the political wing of the Irish Republican Army, Sinn Féin, enter the power-sharing Northern Ireland executive. The party is now the largest in the region's parliament, is Ireland's main opposition party, and also holds seats in the UK's parliament in Westminster, which it boycotts. And in South Africa, the African National Congress that fought an armed struggle against the apartheid regime has been in government since 1994. For decades, Western powers adopted the apartheid government's stance that the ANC was a terrorist organization. When Nelson Mandela, the first president of South Africa to be elected in a fully representative democracy, died in 2013, Western leaders flocked to his funeral, hailing him as a liberator.
I am not a saint, he said, unless you think of a saint as a sinner who keeps on trying.
Yet, unlike Northern Ireland, where adversaries eventually negotiated a political compromise, Palestinians face a far-right Israeli government vehemently opposed to concessions and the creation of a Palestinian state. And unlike the former apartheid government in South Africa, Western allies continue to support and arm Israel, despite its illegal occupation and settlements in the West Bank and the genocide in Gaza. The final stage of the US 20-point peace plan aims to establish talks between Israel and Palestinians.